Hi, it's Ray. Welcome back to my channel. Welcome if you're new. Can you hear the storm? There's this absolutely incredible storm going on at the moment. It was raining really heavily earlier when it was still dark. It's now like 10 to 7 in the morning. I'm just filming this before I get to work for the day. It was raining so much just after I woke up in the morning at about 5 a.m. Like my favourite sort of weather, pounding on the roof. And now it's not really raining anymore, but the thunder and lightning are starting to rumble and flash, which just makes me feel so cozy and bookish, the perfect time to be filming a book wrap-up video. I'm excited to share with you the books that I read in November this year. They were an extremely varied selection of books. None of them were really anything like any of the others. Okay, so here are the books that I read in book form, and then I also read one book on my Kindle. I'm going to just work through chronologically. The first thing that I read this month is Women Who Run With the Wolves by Clarissa, Pinkola, Estés. I say read in inverted commas because although I finished it this month, I've actually been reading this book genuinely for about 2 years. It is a really unique read. I honestly can't compare it to anything else that I've ever read before. The author takes various fairy tales and ancient oral stories, analyzes them in extreme detail from a strong feminist and psychoanalytical perspective to look at the lessons that are kind of hidden like nuggets within these ancient tales to support us in living fulfilling lives as women. Like all self-help books, it kind of takes the author's ideal of what a person should be and how a person should live as the thing to which you are striving. And the ideal woman in this book is a woman who is filled with the spirit of the wild woman, which is a term Estés uses to portray a woman who is very in touch with her intuition, who is self-led. A lot of kind of warnings against selling your soul to get gratitude from others and being kind of a trampled doormat. I think that's Estés' kind of worst fear. So I found genuinely that my enjoyment of this book varied a lot depending on which tale I was reading. I think the different chapters resonate with you at different times in your life, or maybe not at all. This book had a lot of food for thought in it. It had a lot of opportunities where it made me stop and think about whether I was really living the life that I wanted to live, about whether I agreed with what the author was saying I ought to do in order to be living the life that I wanted to live. There were a lot of times where I had to pause and read the sentences. The writing is very dense. Sometimes it feels overly complex. So yeah, it did take a lot of intellectual energy to read, which is partly why I read it over such a long period of time. I had to be very much in the mood for it, and even when I was in the mood for it, I would only read a few pages at a time because it's not at all an addictive kind of text. What changed the game for me was when I started annotating and using it more as a workbook and a thought book than as something just to read. This gave me the opportunity to engage more closely with the ideas in it, particularly about making space for your creative life, which I think is her number one point. So she feels, A, that in this kind of rational society, the inner compass of your intuition, which is kind of innate within all human beings, is being erased by modern society, by our preference for rationality. And her second point is that in order to feel fulfilled and to be nourished as women, we need to make space for our own creative endeavours. And even if that is a struggle, even if others poo-poo it and say that we're wasting our time, say that our creative endeavours are not valuable, that they matter, and they make us who we are, and they make our life have meaning. Ultimately, I think this book really helped me in my drive to make more space for creativity in my own life, which I have found immensely fulfilling. And I do agree with her that having a strong creative outlet in your life, whatever that is, does give your life a sense of purpose and joy. Estés is not a woman who shies away from saying what she thinks and what she feels and what she believes to be right and to be important for women. And although at times I felt like she wasn't writing for a woman who was me, she is very much on the side of marginalised women, which is enormously important. I think it's a bit of a Marmite book. Some people really can't bear it at all. Some people adore it and it totally changes their life. I feel like I do with Marmite. a bit in between, in that I'm generally more leaning towards the love it side, but I don't absolutely adore it. I would, however, reread this book. I would especially reread this book if I became a mother of a young girl, because I think there's a lot in here about allowing women to have their own self-expression and valuing that. And that's an important reminder for yourself, and it's an important reminder of your role in communicating with and uplifting other women. So yeah, that was Women Who Run With the Wolves. Next up, and complete change, a book by Koli Bofane, who is a Congolese author, and the book is called Congo Inc. I read this because I obviously live in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and I am appalled at myself that I hadn't yet read anything by a Congolese author. There is a reason for that, which is that it's incredibly difficult to find anything in translation written by a Congolese author, and this book was the only thing that I could find. Firstly, kind of just a general trigger warning about this book. It's an extremely challenging read. It covers sexual violence in explicit detail. I felt like this book took everything that you knew goes on in the world, but don't want to face up to the fact that it does go on in the world, and laid it out in front of you. The book roughly follows a protagonist who's called Isukenga. He is a member of a tribe of pygmy people living in the rainforest in the central Congo basin, and this is kind of important and relevant throughout the novel because it very much challenges stereotypes. He is not as you would expect him to be. He is completely besotted with the idea of globalization. He's managed to steal a laptop on which he plays a video game called Raging Trade, which basically parallels the way that corporations are working in the Congo in terms of just taking whatever resources for themselves they can get and ignoring the value of human life in that process. And although this book is fiction, it very clearly makes its point about the horrors that the greed of the world, particularly the Western world, for natural resources is creating in the Congo in terms of loss of human life, in terms of human suffering, in terms of environmental degradation, in terms of injustice, in terms of corruption and embedding and encouraging corruption. And the book does that fantastically. It's mostly set in Kinshasa, the capital of the Congo, and it follows this wide array of characters who between them I think represent a lot of the main players and people who come to Kinshasa and live in Kinshasa for various reasons. So for example, it has a Western aid worker, a Congolese warlord, a number of sheges who are the street children of the Congo, including refugees and ex-child soldiers, child prostitutes. It has members of the United Nations peacekeeping forces. It has Chinese workmen. All of these characters' lives into play as they explore this main theme of globalization, what it looks like in the Congo and what its effects are. So in the introduction to the edition that I read, which the introduction is written by Dominic Thomas, there's a paragraph which I think captures quite effectively the feel of this book. It says, yet somehow, in the face of genocide, ethnic cleansing, civil conflict, disease, coercion, and gender-based violence, out of the horror, mutilation, dismemberment, hacking, burning, and rape, Koli Bofane's novel strives to delineate the contours of a universe in which fiction can address the indignation and gradually pave the way for a moral imagination. I think we all like to feel that we do have a moral imagination, and my initial response to that paragraph was to think, does it pave the way for moral imagination? Like, this isn't a book in which there is a clear-cut path to justice in which everything is going to be tied up in a nice parcel and all of our characters will have happy endings and the Congo will cease to suffer. This is very much a book where characters' development is more a gradual loss of innocence than gradual progress towards success. However, by exposing you as the reader to the suffering and injustice that goes on behind the closed doors of the world's attention, and by challenging you in your own role as a Western consumer who kind of wants to ignore the painful things that you read about in this book because they make you feel uncomfortable, because they make you feel guilty, I think in that sense, this novel does expand your moral imagination. A couple of other things I really liked about it. So the full title of this book is Congo Inc. Bismarck's Testament. This book, by being called Bismarck's Testament, kind of refers back to the fact that Chancellor Otto von Bismarck of Germany held this meeting in which Africa was effectively parcelled out to various people, and this gave Leopold the chance to grasp hold of the country, which led it down the route that it's had of being a country where, under Leopold's rule, he famously exploited the country's rubber reserves to their full and forced Congolese people to work as slaves on rubber plantations in order to fuel the Western world's need for rubber for multiple things, but in part for stuff like the First World War. And I think this is mentioned in Congo Inc., how Congo's resources and the kind of violence that goes on within Congo has then fueled wider world violence, because without the rubber from Congo, a lot of the technological developments that took place in World War I wouldn't have been possible. Without the uranium from Congo, the nuclear bombs in World War II wouldn't have been available. And so this book kind of looks at how, from the very beginning, the West has enforced violence upon Congo because of its natural resources. I highly recommend the book King Leopold's Ghost if you want to find out more about not even the Belgian rule, but the rule of the entirety of the Congo by the King of Belgium as his personal property. That is a fascinating historical book which tells you a lot more about that and about those times during which literally millions of Congolese lives were lost. Like, the human toll of colonialism in Congo is equivalent to the Holocaust, and yet it's something that we barely ever hear about. The writing style was quite to the point, quite explicit, descriptive in terms of painting a picture, not kind of what's the word I'm looking for? Not poetically descriptive. I'm very grateful for the experience I've had reading this book. I highly recommend it, but it does come with quite a warning. I feel genuinely a bit traumatized by reading it. There are images from that book that I will never be able to get out of my mind. Although I didn't think about this explicitly at the time, perhaps this was the reason that my next reads, which I'm going to review all together, were children's books. And these are 3 of the books in the Worst Witch series by Jill Murphy. I had these on my shelves for ages. I loved watching the TV series when I was little. I had really high expectations of these because I know that they're kind of a children's classic, and they're set in a witching school. I enjoy Harry Potter like most people, so I thought these were going to be really fun and really enjoyable reads. The book follows Mildred Hubble, who's the worst witch in the school. Mildred basically goes through these books with spells going wrong and other people getting her into trouble, and her taking the entirety of the blame for it and being nearly expelled from school or whatever because of something that she didn't do. And she doesn't really stick up for herself, which is frustrating. Like, the school is portrayed in such a way that you wouldn't really want to go there. You only want to go because it's a magic school and it's in a castle, and that sounds cool, but actually it's constant descriptions of awful food, of horrible rules, of being really cold all the time. It just sounds miserable and uninviting, and a lot of the characters in it are miserable and uninviting and unloving. And I actually just felt really sorry for Mildred throughout all of the books, and I didn't feel like she ever really got the praise or reward that she deserved. She just seemed to be constantly being belittled for being the worst witch, even though she's actually a really nice girl. So yeah, I was surprised by these. I didn't feel like there was any lesson that you could take from them as a child, except that sometimes you get in trouble for stuff and it's not really your fault. The third one that was thicker was a bit better in terms of it did actually feel like a book. The plot was more developed. But I was actually disappointed with the world which was offered to us to escape into by Jill Murphy. I didn't feel that it was an enjoyable or exciting world in the way that I expected it to be. All of the magic tropes were just extremely obvious, whether that's because magic school books have become incredibly widespread and popular due to the popularity of Harry Potter. It's now kind of a standard part of our modern culture that's a reference point for basically everybody. You know, maybe these books are a bit more innovative when they were initially written, but now they just feel like a skeleton of the Harry Potter stories. A lot of young children might enjoy them as a read-to-self book. I didn't feel that they were a children's classic that translates well when read as an adult, which was disappointing because a lot of the books that are really near to my heart are books which are written for children, but are written with such beauty and richness and universal truths that I adore reading them as an adult, and I'm a massive proponent for adults reading children's literature, as I think it opens up a whole different perspective on life which you don't get in adults literature. Unfortunately for me, these books did not open that door. Okay, and the last thing that I read this month is the book that I was talking about in my most recent reading vlog, The Fortnight in September by Sherriff. This was a lovely read. It takes a lower middle class family who live in London and follows through their annual 2-week holiday by the seaside in England. And that's the entire plot. What it does whilst working through that is to really be an ode to humanity and to the wonders and necessity of a holiday and a change. And this was an incredibly poignant and moving and beautiful book. The writing is very understated, quite simple, quite reflective, not really meandering, but mirrors the thought process of someone on holiday, I felt, very effectively. Each little chapter kind of follows each character through a small portion of their holiday. So it might be a walk that they go on by themselves along the seafront, and then their mind and the thoughts that they're having as they think back upon something that happened to them in earlier life, as they kind of sort out their thoughts and sort out how they feel about life and decide what they want to do going forwards. This book was excellent, in part just for being such an original idea to have a plot that isn't really a plot. I also did feel like that was its downfall. It was a nice book, it was a sweet book, but it didn't grip you because the plot is not a gripping plot, it's not supposed to be. And although I really enjoy writing like that, this book didn't quite get under my skin. The characters were not characters that you kind of felt great sorrow for parting with at the end. I think that's because R.C. Sherriff was trying to represent with each character something quite universal about human life. They weren't particularly strong characters, they were all nice, which, after some of the stuff that I've read earlier this month, was a delight and a rest to read. A thing that made this book really poignant for me was the fact that the family is a mother and father, their 2 grown-up children, and then their younger son. So their 2 grown-up children are like 17 and 19, and then they have another son who's 10, and they go away on this family holiday that they've been on in September every year of their lives. And it portrays wonderfully the joy of this family holiday, the togetherness of family time. But there's also a sense of nostalgia and of endings, because it feels very likely that this will be the last time that the family go on holiday all together. And even though they're planning to go back next year, the lodgings that they've stayed in all of their lives are really starting to decay. To be honest, people are stopping going there. They only go out of loyalty to the landlady who's aging. The characters don't necessarily engage with that ending. They look the other way and they ignore it, and there's something very human in the way that that is written. I love the way that R.C. Sherriff explores that kind of freedom and space to breathe that you get by the sea, and it's represented in the way the characters change out of their stuffy London clothes and go for walks, feel the wind in their hair, get sunburnt, and simultaneously their minds open up and they have a chance to reflect on the year that they've had and to leave at the end of the holiday feeling ready to tackle another year. It moved me, it was poignant. It was beautifully written. I think the thing that's so beautiful about this book is its sort of universality. And I love, for example, the description of when they get halfway through their holiday and there's already that creeping sense of sorrow at the end of the holiday, worries about work start to creep in. what the holiday means to the different characters at the different stages of their lives is beautifully shared. This is not a complicated novel. There's nothing in here that's going to astound or shock you. This is the complete opposite of Congo Ink. This is utter comfort. It's very classic Persephone classics in that sense. It's literary but not too literary, you know, it's nice to read but it's not a challenging read. It's heartwarming, it's sweet, it's moving and very perceptive in places, like a hot drink at the end of a cold day. So yeah, that's everything that I read in November. Life has been pretty busy and crazy lately. I haven't written full reviews of the books yet, which I am planning to do, so I feel like my thoughts on them were not as ordered as they were in October, but I hope that I've managed to portray something of the themes and the topics in those books that I read, and give you a bit of a taste of whether they might be things that you're interested in or not, particularly given as they're all such different books. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you in the next video.